Good morning, everybody, and thank you to ADPC and the rest of the organizers for this great opportunity, this great Asian Business Forum to allow myself and the panel that will be discussing business continuity and community resilience with you today, the opportunity to share some experiences and insight on how community action can really, by businesses, can really inspire and move and progress the resilience at the community level. Without further ado, I'd like to bring the panel up here, and as they arrive, I will do a short introduction. Our agenda today is very tight. We have an hour and a half, and what we're going to do for the first part is have a short discussion, just a very friendly conversation about the topic, and then we're going to break. And when we break, we're not going to leave our seats. We might ask people to move closer together, but we're going to have an activity where there'll be tabletop discussion based on a couple of scenarios that we're going to present to you to get you to really apply some of the experience you have and some of the thinking that you can share amongst yourselves and then ultimately through the materials that we'll be collecting with us. So can I bring Tracy and Gary and Garth up here, please? The Global Disaster Preparedness Center has been working for the past 18 months with a really wide and diverse group of stakeholders to look at the role of business continuity as it relates to small and medium-sized businesses at the community level. The Red Cross and Red Crescent Network has a massive reach. We're in 190 countries, and we have branch offices in 160,000 locations. And at that community level and that participation, we're able to really link with vulnerable groups, with families, our traditional audience, but we also see an opportunity to link to the private sector. And through this series of discussions with different organizations, multinational groups. Hey, Gary, can you come on up too? We're gonna have we have an interest in really supporting the resilience of these organizations with the recognition, as we've discussed at length, that action by SMEs can really help improve the community's resilience. So I'm going to just quickly go through the panelists here, starting at my far left. Tracy Hatton represents Resilient Organizations. She's been supporting our activities for the last 12 months or so, and has a really specific set of experiences related to the language and the tools that really work for small and medium-sized businesses. Garth Dawson represents the New Zealand Red Cross, an important partner of the Global Disaster Preparedness Center. He has a rich experience looking at the ways that the business of the Red Cross connects to the community. And then Gary Rynhart, representing the International Labor Organization, based here in Bangkok, supports the private sector connection to employees and the way that the tools that can be provided and the support that can be provided to businesses can really expand the resilience of different organizations and companies. So I'm going to sit down with the group and we're going to have a short discussion, and then afterwards we'll move into the activity. Okay, so for the first question, and just to get us started off, I'd like us maybe to go, maybe we can go in this order here, and ask the question, if you could please describe the importance of business continuity action as it relates to community resilience from the perspective of your organization. Gary, can you start?
Well, I'll try. Good morning, everybody, and pleasure to be here with you this morning. And thank you to the organizers and indeed to the sponsors for inviting the ILO to this event. In terms of the topic, SMEs, I mean, they're an extremely difficult group to reach, as I'm sure you've had in your discussions yesterday, particularly the kind of the micro to kind of growing small enterprise. They're owner-managers, they're busy people, they don't have time to go to a 2 or 3 day training session, they've got too many different concerns. And I think what we've tried to do in terms of our work is to look at that constituency in terms of those kinds of pressures and deliver to them a package of tools that they can kind of use in a practical way in their business that makes sense to them and in a way that they can use in terms of those kinds of time pressures. They get it in that it's a usually, particularly for a small owner-run business, in that it's a personal endeavor. It's their own personal business. They don't want any harm to come to their business. They just don't have time to think through these things in a strategic fashion. So it's giving them the time and space to be able to do that. They are a particularly vulnerable group because, as I said, they haven't the strategic kind of oversight of larger organizations. I think what I would like to do, though, is just, before we get into that, maybe in the second round of questions, in terms of the practicalities of those tools and what they look like, is to speak a little bit about the work that we've done in terms of the private sector organizations that we work with and the role that they can play in terms of disaster prevention, particularly for SMEs, and in terms of disaster response. The ILO is a tripartite constituency. It's a tripartite organization that works with governments, workers' organizations, trade unions, and employer and business organizations. So we're unique in the UN system in that we have this three-part, as part of our governance structure, and we have departments that deal with workers and trade unions, and I'm on the private sector side. So our technical programs in the region deal with those and work with those national organizations and the sectoral associations. What they can do is probably two things. Firstly, in terms of the policy interface, and this is extremely important, in terms of engaging with policymakers in promoting an environment in advance that can then be applied in a post-disaster situation, and in terms of mechanisms that can help particularly smaller enterprises, tax relief, shared insurance schemes, things like these. These are all policy measures that can be promoted in advance. Developing, memorandums of understandings with large companies. What you often find in a post-disaster situation is plenty of offers of help, often cases of duplication, miscommunication, and so forth. In addition to finding out exactly, what are the real needs of SMEs in that post-disaster situation. Now, we had a significant project in the Philippines post-Haiyan, and I remember distinctly, just to give you one example, one story. There was a community of largely fisher folk, and they were inundated with offers of boats and equipment. And what they needed actually was refrigeration facilities because they had lots of stock. So it's those kinds of, finding out that kind of information in a very time-sensitive environment, and a representative organization can do that because it's got the scale. So I think it's an important kind of an element. There's a whole range of collective schemes as well that they can do. They can help for small businesses store their information, store their customer information, their client information. For a small 4-person operation that wouldn't have those facilities, the business is washed away, those records are stored collectively. So lots of collective schemes. And I think that's what we find very attractive in terms of working with, not the national business organizations, not even the sectoral associations, but the ones even kind of lower down than that have the capability of reaching those very small businesses that are the heart and soul of these communities that are very, very vulnerable, and providing them through collective schemes with the ability to be able to protect themselves from some of these issues. So in the next round, Omar, perhaps I'll talk to some of the specifics of those tools. But that was just to give it just a general view of the kinds of approaches that we've been doing.
Thank you.
Morning, everybody. Thanks, Omar. From the Red Cross perspective, or from the New Zealand Red Cross perspective, really, you know, the mission of the Red Cross is to reduce vulnerability and to increase community resilience, and SMEs are fundamental to that. I mean, a lot of the discussions yesterday gave information on what an enormous and foundational role that SMEs play in all economies, and it doesn't matter which part of the world you're in. And that role as part of that economy is something that we've embraced and that we've focused on, and that we're trying to connect with the whole of a sort of a whole of community resilience planning strategy at New Zealand Red Cross. So by building connectedness, by increasing social capital through the corporate, small and medium enterprise, families, neighbourhoods, communities and individuals, we'll collectively increase the resilience of our communities. And I think that SMEs particularly and smaller organisations have a particular vulnerability around, you know, the working poor. You know, quite a lot of that very small, sort of the micro enterprises are still poor working people. A lot of SMEs employ poor working people, and they're the most vulnerable to disaster and emergency because they often haven't personally planned for disruption. Their employers have generally not planned well, as we saw yesterday, for disruption, and they don't have the support mechanisms around them to ensure that their social connectedness makes them more resilient under an emergency. So I think what the Red Cross is trying to do in New Zealand is be a facilitator of that social connectedness between these different aspects of society. Ambassador Philip Gibson gave an example of the Resilient New Zealand partnership that we have following the Christchurch earthquakes, where New Zealand Red Cross is a partner with 4 other big corporate stakeholders in identifying leadership and resilience building measures at a corporate level. Now, those big organisations, which are equivalent to big national banks and so on and so forth, also recognise that fundamentally they have a responsibility to the SMEs who are part of their supply chain, who are their customers, who are their stakeholders and so on, to enable them to be more resilient as well. And then the lessons that the corporates learn at scale, they can assist SMEs in developing their business continuity planning activities. And when those small businesses are learning how better to be prepared for disaster, their individuals as their employees and as the family members of employees also become more empowered to be more resilient. And the Red Cross in New Zealand is, I think, has an important role as a facilitator, as a connector, as a knowledge sharer, and as a means for all these different levels of community resilience to be engaged. I think that's probably the biggest picture that I can draw of that whole situation.
Good morning, everyone. Well, I think yesterday's speakers clearly outlined to us how important SMEs are after a disaster or an event. They provide employment, they provide goods and services, they provide some sense of normal when everything else has been turned upside down and is not normal. Being able to go to work, or something as simple as being able to go out and buy bread or milk, really helps with people's sense of psychological well-being. To engage in purposeful activity after a disaster brings hope. To sit and wait brings despair. This is from my experiences in interviewing business owners from the Christchurch earthquake. And those that were empowered to get out there and do something to get their business back up and running expressed positiveness, hope, optimism. They felt bedded to the city. They didn't consider leaving the region. They wanted to get back open to support their employees. Equally, we sometimes forget that employees have just as much of a vested interest in getting a business back open again. They will go to the ends of the earth to a supportive employer to work together to be able to get business back up and running. Now, I come from a research group which existed long before the Christchurch earthquakes, but of course is based in Christchurch and had a very rich field of research, unfortunately, from the earthquake that devastated my hometown. They've been looking into organisational resilience for over 10 years. What they've found based on in research is that resilience has both a planned component, and that's where all of our discussions about business continuity planning come into the matter, but it also has a very important adaptive component. Businesses need to be able to adapt. The plan doesn't usually fit the disaster. And this adaptive capacity is something that can be built in good times. Now, the good news about this view of resilience is that it also has a lot of benefits in business as usual. We talk about how can we actually incentivise businesses to realise that doing something is good. Well, one of the ways is to show them how building resilience can help them against the things that they identify as being the most important. One of the ADPC reports that I was reading yesterday identified global financial crises as SME's main concern, rather than the natural hazards that we're so used to thinking about. Building resilience can help businesses to weather any of the storm of any of the changes that are happening in our society. And this is one of the selling points that we can put to them. Also, that small changes can make a big difference. They don't have to learn a whole new language. They don't have to master a whole lot of jargon. It is possible to actually give businesses advice in both the area of business continuity planning and resilience planning in general, in smaller, bite-sized chunks. Make it possible, make it easy, make it manageable for them, so we don't have to sell it to them quite so much. They understand that they want to keep their business going, and we need to make it easier for them to do that.
Let's see if this one works. Okay. Thank you all. Just a quick summary. I think we've heard that there are ways to really explore the community resilience of businesses, of small and medium-sized businesses, at the micro level, talking to conglomerates and different organizations that are coming together to share some of their concerns and issues. At the national level, thinking about how the resilience of those communities help impact or support the goals and objectives of larger businesses, and then really thinking about the getting into the approaches that are done and the steps that can be taken to take action and the reflection on what those steps can be. So building on that, building on the last comments from Tracy about incentives, I'd really like to explore a bit more about some of the ways and some of the tools that you've been considering, and how can the support from your organizations or organizations like the Red Cross and other community-centered actors inspire action of SMEs?
Thanks, thanks, Omar. Just to quickly echo the previous two speakers, I think I certainly would encourage anybody active in this particular domain to look at the New Zealand experience over the last number of years, and particularly the Christchurch response. We actually did a case study on on how the folks down there responded to it, the business side of things, and there's some wonderful examples of what they were able to do in terms of getting businesses back on their feet, in terms of sharing staff, getting finance to different companies. I think there was an employment, getting folks getting paid. There was a guarantee scheme. All of these, some things that won't work in other places for sure, because we did a number of case studies, and some things won't work. But there's some really terrific. I hate to use the word best practice, but there really was some terrific examples of stuff that really did work very, very well in New Zealand. I think in terms of SMEs, incentives to get them to prepare for any kind of calamity is pretty important. Particularly the kinds of organisations we're talking about, they are, the 3-4 staff, family-run businesses, hand-to-mouth kind of operations with very little resources. Very little time to think of these kinds of things, but there is simple things that they can do, and they're the kinds of interventions that we need to focus on. During the course of those case studies that we did last year, I was in the Philippines, in Legazpi, which is as a track. It's probably one of the most dangerous places in the world, because they get hit with absolutely everything. They've got weather systems coming through. They're at the core of those. They've got a volcano that's still active. There's earth tremors frequently. They really, it's a very, very prone area to calamities. Yet, through experience, they've developed some wonderful resilience towards dealing with these things, simple things. And being in a company, they said the flooding was the worst recent thing that they've had. I said, how do you manage with that? Well, we put our stock on the second floor, or we put it on higher up. I mean, there's simple things you can do in terms of observing your business. They have elements such as, and these are things that we're trying to replicate in other regions, they have things like hazard maps, where they've mapped out exactly where the key infrastructure is for particular types of companies. What's the first thing that they're going to need? Which particular road for suppliers? How long can those suppliers last in terms of, are those companies giving supplies to different suppliers? Things like that are very practical and then can be run by business associations, have been quite effective. What we did was a small training component on business contingency planning for that kind of 5-employee type firm. It was based on our experience in that we have a lot of training programs in the ILO around enterprise development, and a lot of them, to be honest with you, are very big endeavours. They require a donor. There's quite a bit of infrastructure around them. They can be very, very good, and we've been doing them for 25 years. Quite a few of them, I have to say, fall over once the donor funding goes. So we were looking for kind of new ways to do this, and we came up with this idea of bringing together small companies on a particular topic and giving them some prepared material, and they would work through this issue themselves and learning from each other. So, for example, in terms of the enterprise development stuff, we had things like, how to price your good, and we do a 2-hour module where 5 companies, different companies, would come together, and they would go through a process. There's a learning element to it, and they would come up with a plan tailored for each of their companies, learning off each other. So we tried to apply this to BCP, and we developed a module, and we've been running it in the Philippines for the last 12 months. Been going very, very good. Again, because it's a thing that can be done in the evenings, just 2 hours. It can be done at the weekends. It's a very flexible thing, and it's a collection of individuals who are in the same kind of boat, and they can kind of learn from each other. So we've found that's gone very, very well. It doesn't give them a very complicated set of knowledge. It gives them, at the end of the day, an ability to go back and look at their business, find out where they're vulnerable, find out the kinds of cost-benefit analysis in terms of the different things that they would need to do. They could then make a practical decision based on their own time on what they could do to implement, to prepare their business, just in certain degrees, and there's certain kind of levels to it. So we found that's been quite useful. We've also tried to pursue schemes, for example, that you can accredit training. So for firms that do this kind of training, they would get accreditation that can then help with insurance schemes, that can help then with in terms of getting finance, access to finance in a post scheme. So that accreditation element, I think, is pretty important. But as I said in the opening, a lot of those kinds of shared things that can be done, shared collective insurance schemes, shared storing of information, that's all a kind of a critical thing that can be done collectively. I think I'll leave it at that.
From our perspective, I think I mentioned a little bit before that Red Cross is seen as a trusted stakeholder, both by businesses and by individuals and families and community members. So we see, as I said, our role in connecting people. But we also have some sort of tangible tools, resources and products and so on that we've kind of packaged into into three sort of areas. We talk about being Red Cross ready, and we look at that on a three sort of levels. One is being ready businesses, one's ready neighbourhoods, and one's ready families. And we have a range of interventions, tools, resources and so on that holistically lead communities towards a state of increased resilience. The Red Cross Red Crescent movement has a humanitarian goal that we call the 1 Billion Coalition, which you're all encouraged and welcome to be part of course, which is to by 2025, for 1 billion people in the world to have taken active steps towards enhancing community resilience. And that's kind of a loosely defined goal because, you know, active steps toward community resilience could be a very small step for some people, it could be an enormous leap for others. By 2025, reinterpreting that for New Zealand's population of 4 million, we've decided that's 1.25 million New Zealanders have taken active steps toward enhancing community resilience. And we've identified those three levels of community, business and families and individuals with specific programs that lead us towards that goal of 1.25 million, or a quarter of New Zealand's population to have taken tangible steps towards increasing their resilience. For example, in the Red Cross, in the Ready Business aspect, New Zealand Red Cross is the leading provider of first aid training in New Zealand, and we're working on new training modules that includes things like social first aid programs for lone workers, so for these small sort of micro businesses, which in New Zealand are the same as they are in any other place in the world, are sort of farmers and fishermen, and these people who, if anything, an emergency was to occur to them, you know, an ambulance or assistance isn't close at hand. So how do you become more resilient when you're out in the workplace and you're that one person on your own? Working with the GDPC, and Tracy at Resorgs, we're looking at piloting the Business Continuity Initiative in New Zealand, being involved in that, which we're really, really super enthusiastic about. And that has the support of that group of resilient New Zealand corporates who are looking for ways of empowering their supply chain and their customers to be more resilient as well. So their support of that is really, really important. We're running resilient, we're looking at developing resilient business workshops out of that partnership as well. And in my role, which is more of a social enterprise type role within our organisation, how do we develop sustainable, value-generating businesses within vulnerable communities that can both deliver social impact and sustainable business outcomes as well? So we run social enterprise workshops and development courses to help people who have a good idea and who want to do something both for community and make that a sustainable business model as well, to develop a business case, see if we can help them assist with funding, connect them with other supporters and so on, to be able to increase that sort of social capital type business model, which is, we think, is a really valuable way of running business, obviously. As far as family resilience goes, again, we've launched the Red Cross Hazard app in New Zealand, which is now supported by our emergency management, civil defence and emergency management ministry, and each of our local government civil defence groups, as well as the Met Service and all the other key alerting agencies in New Zealand. So by default, it's basically become the hazard alerting platform for New Zealand, which is a really encouraging thing. We deliver first aid training in schools called People Savers, and we have a sort of a program for young children as well. We work with Plunket, which is a postnatal sort of midwifery support sort of organisation, to give mothers and young families information around looking after their children and first aid. And we're developing a whole series of community resilience programs which fill in the gap between the emergency preparedness community stuff that the emergency management groups provide, and the family awareness and family social preparedness aspect of things. So the Red Cross is in sort of that space in there where the government can get to this point, but it's that sort of last mile of connection with individuals and families where the Red Cross can really add value. In the same way that after the Christchurch earthquake, when we were doing the outreach, the knocking on people's doors to see if you're okay, one of the most valuable things that we learned was that if somebody had a Red Cross worker with them, people opened their doors. If you didn't have someone with Red Cross with you, everybody thought you were suspicious somehow, the government coming to try and find out what you were doing. So I think our role as a trusted stakeholder in these various different areas gives Red Cross a really helpful and supportive role to play in community resilience.
Awesome. Building on what Garth just said, hands up who likes being told what to do by the government? Oh my gosh, there's no hands up. One of our messages is that who sends the message is incredibly important, and Garth has just explained how well respected, certainly in New Zealand and I think in a lot of communities, the Red Cross is. So if the Red Cross is giving advice on business resilience, hands up who might listen. Come on, thank you. Any more? Think the Red Cross? Yep. Okay. That's one of our messages, is find the right partners to spread the message. Possibly in some countries the government may be effective. Certainly in my own country it's not particularly. One of my other messages about how do we get businesses to sit up and take notice, can we make it fun? Now, I know anyone who is immersed in the world of business continuity planning might think that is impossible, but we think it can be made fun. We think it can be made easier. And how about we make it free? Now, we're not trying to put all of you BCP consultants out of business, don't worry, because there's always a place for consultancy in the larger organisations. But how about if we want to get this down to the SMEs, that we create something that they don't have to pay for? Can we make it easy for them? Can we make it readily accessible to them? And can we prove to them that it's worthwhile, that it is grounded in solid research, that it really does make a difference to them? Can we use a little bit of competition a little bit of peer pressure. Hey Garth, my business has gone through and done this. Would that spur you on just a little bit? Yeah. These are all ways that we think that we can work better and work more to get SMEs to engage. Now, we will never get all of them. Every one that we can get may be the one that contributes to their community remaining viable after a disaster. Thank you.
Thank you all. I think that there were a few themes in there that really resonate, and in a way they were summarized by Tracy with the vision that we have as the Global Disaster Preparedness Center, working with these different stakeholders to develop tools that can be delivered by the Red Cross and services that can wrap around and support them to support SMEs' actions towards business continuity and business resilience. There are opportunities with the work that's been done and the experiences that have been shared that really trigger the recognition that small steps can actually lead to big gains. And going through the complete process of being ISO certified in business continuity isn't realistic or achievable for many SMEs, but basic actions can add up, especially if they're being done broadly by different stakeholders in the community. So rather than ask another round of questions, I'd like to open it up to the audience and see if there are any questions. We have a few minutes before we need to split into our second activity.
Good morning. I would like to pose a question to Red Cross gentlemen. Somebody told me that I have to introduce myself. My name is Pran Siamwala. I'm from Krung Si Bank. I'm responsible for doing the policy for environment and social risk management. We had flood, horrible flood in 2011. We haven't seen much appearance of Red Cross here in Thailand or any other events in that matter. What you have explained, what you've done in New Zealand is really amazing. And the news that I've seen on the International Red Cross and Red Crescent, the things they've done was really impeccable and exactly what you have described. Just wondering, whether the International Red Cross community has any standard or peer review of Red Cross in other nations that they should be adhere and basically comparable, especially heavily needed here in Thailand. Thank you.
Let me start off with the answer to that. It's a very good question, and thank you very much for posing it. The efforts that are made by Red Cross in response to and recovery from disasters typically are prioritized at the community level where the most vulnerable individuals and families may be located. A lot of times the capacity of the National Society is limited by volunteers and private donations that come in to support them. So not every Red Cross and Red Cross Society can respond at the same level. I do know that the Thai Red Cross is a remarkable organization and has done so much in the community, not just for the response, but in building community resilience at the local level and focusing on some of the ways and some of the actions that can reinforce community action. As far as peer review and sharing experience, it's one of the missions of the Global Disaster Preparedness Center to capture learning and experience and reflect on good practice and build on the models and share sort of the approaches that have been used successfully in other organizations so that they may be tried and built on locally by national societies. So I think it's definitely a conversation. Several people in the room representing different Red Cross organizations would love to share other examples with you following this presentation.
Hello, my name is Roy Williams. I'm associated with the Global Disaster Prevention Center on the advisory side. And I think there's a fundamental, first an observation. A lot of the points that were made struck me as being extremely informative, but at the same time dealing with SMEs and other associations almost independently of the basic educational systems within the society. So my question therefore becomes, to what extent in your outreach strategies do you really go down to the public school level so as to sensitize the children, and then the children in turn sensitizing their parents as to the importance of what their role in society is?
Thanks, Roy. I can do that one. Speaking on our behalf, that's really, really important. And one of the key challenges there is our capacity to do that, which we're actively working on. We do have a program of an active program which has been running for over 20 years, I think. It's called People Savers. That's the name of our school program, and that's run at both junior and whatever high school level, whatever they're called in different countries. The education of children to pass information on to their parents is really, really important. I know that GDPC also have a program called the Pillowcase Project, which is based on that same premise, which again has been run successfully in a number of countries, hasn't it, Omar? We're also looking at running that in Canterbury. And that sits alongside some of the other programs which we're already doing, which build from that community resilience, that community upwards approach, as opposed to the corporate SME back down approach, which both are really, really important. But yeah, I think the engagement with kids early and often and in a way that's easily digestible, and that they are then inspiring their parents and other parts of the community to make steps to build resilience is really, really important.
Thanks, Garth. I saw a couple more hands. The woman here in the front.
Yeah, hi, this is Loy from the GDPC Technical Advisory Group. No, I wanted to ask the question. I think it's exciting that within the whole sphere of business that we are focusing on SMEs, both in the ADPC project as well as in the work of GDPC. So I'd like to ask, both the colleagues from New Zealand, how much have you approached SME associations, either as National Industry Association SME sections or local industrial parks and local SME associations? And they are, okay, so this is one part. In outreach, the potential to go through suppliers to a major corporation is another channel. And I think that's an opportunity. So if we had to reach out, rather than reaching out to individual SMEs by all the resources, whether it's the Red Cross, whether it's ADPC, whether it's the national government departments and offices of SMEs, we must bring in the industry association. So I'd like to hear a comment on this, and later perhaps to hear comments from the ADPC project countries that about how effectively this has been used, because I see that missing as a strategy. Thank you.
Can I say something? Thank you very much. Well, actually, my question or my statement is going to respond your question. So during the tsunami, when the tsunami hit Aceh, at that time I was the president of Indonesian Business Association. So I would like to share what I did, during the tsunami. So when the tsunami hit Aceh, and then 3 weeks after the tsunami hit Aceh, I flew to Aceh. At that time, everything, the water still black, and then I still see a lot of blood, on the street. So what I did, and then I tried to invite all of my members in Aceh. And then I told them, hey, come on, you have to wake up for the business. Even during the war, you have to create something. There is always opportunity in the business. I said, let your husband still crying, and then, but you as a mother, you have to start something, and then you have to earn money through, be aware that you still have children that you have to send to the school. So what I did, I worked together with the SIDA at that time, and then I tried to collect some money from the corporate, and then I was able to rent one-story building, about four stories, and then the top, those who lost the houses, they stay on the top. And then on the second floor, I turned to become a training center. And then on the first, on the first floor, it's becoming like the store. When they train how to create something, it's becoming their store. So that's what I did, So I think from yesterday until now, I agree with you, Pa, with the last person who raised the question. This forum hasn't involved a lot, about the business community. I think we have to work closely either with the Chamber of Commerce within the area. And then now my second question. My second question is, do you have any formula? Because at that time, I feel like, I've done very difficult thing because I have to negotiate the government and then negotiate to the bank, try to reduce, restructure the loan from my members, and then I have to negotiate also with the bank to eliminate all the interest because I know recovery, it's gonna take about a year or 2 years. But at the same time, I have to motivate my member to do something, to sell something, I said, hey, a lot of people, just treat people who came to to Aceh is becoming like a tourist. You sell the t-shirt, it's like a tsunami. This is not taking advantage, but this is the opportunity business. On one hand, I motivated them to do like that. But at the same time, I said, I have to negotiate with the bank. I think there should be a formula, with this, during this forum, how to work together so there's not going to be overlap. What is the role of the government? What is the role of the private sector, meaning the corporate? At that time I talked to the big company, try to give them, to give the opportunity of my member to sell the rice, to sell the sugar without paying the money in advance. So that is what we are doing at that time. So if there is a formula, I think that will be wonderful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, just to respond to the last two questions, I would 100% agree in terms of working with industry groups and representative business organizations from large to small, in that they have two things. One is, you say, the ability for scale in terms of delivering BCP products. They have the ability to get that through their membership to a wide number. That's the first thing. So that's a critical thing. The second thing is they have the trust of their members. In different economies and situations, there will be different levels of trust in government. New Zealand is a high trust example where there's trust in government to deliver. Other situations less so. And I think in terms of a representative organization of business interests, local chambers and whatnot, they have that kind of ability to have trust. So that's pretty critical. So my final thing on this would be, in terms of supporting those organizations, certainly I would ask for the larger companies to be able to support that representative organizations at a local level, at a province level, at a national level, to be able to deliver those kind of products in terms of the scale.
So there's one question. I have time for one more question in the back of the room.
Good morning. My name is Indira, and I'm not going to use the current hat that I'm wearing with GDPC. I'm going to use my hat with the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent I wore in the last 5 years in the region. I would like to partially answer to the question of the gentleman who asked about the Thai Red Cross, for example, and also the general overview on the relationships with the SMEs, corporations, Red Cross, etc. What is very important is to know that the mood is still very responsive. There are ongoing many partnerships which are not officially recorded or formalized in the partnership agreements or whatever. They happen spontaneously in a very much responsive mode. It has not been strategically developed into the long-term partnership, which will look into the business continuity planning, etc. So I think it's unfair to say that no such partnerships are taking place. But those partnerships, they need to be further evolved and developed into the long-term resilience building partnerships between the SMEs. They are still believing as well that it's easier for them to respond, to provide the funding, because until now those kind of partnerships have been seen, we provide the money and you deliver the services. It's far beyond that one. So if you look, for example, in Thailand, we have been using in Thailand the example of excellent partnerships with Coca-Cola, with the transportation companies. The problem with the Red Cross in general is the Red Cross is not very good in marketing their work. They just focus on what they do. They stay too silent, and I think that's one of the things that we have identified as well. And even working with the GDPC, we would be looking into that one. How do we actually document? How do we learn the best practices out of it? So it's not actually that not much has been done. A lot has been done. Reality is mainly in response. Now that the scenario has changed, we all need to move now to the prevention, to resilience building, to disaster risk reduction. There is a willingness on all sides, but the big question is now, how do we all get together and write the business continuity plan? How do we have a strategic approach to that one? So it's not that it's not happening. I think that's my key message. It is happening to a great extent, but it's not documented. It's very sporadic. It's very random. It happens mainly in the response in a major emergencies. I would even go beyond the Thailand. If we go just to Philippines after Haiyan, it was unbelievable, the response and cooperation and the partnerships between the Red Cross, not only Red Cross itself, and all possible corporations, major companies, international, local, national. It was fantastic, even in the recovery period. But it's all random. And I think the time has come for us actually to put it in a kind of more official way, to develop the cooperation agreements, to business continuity plans or whatever. So that's all what I wanted to just to basically share. The fact is that we got together here is one of the ways. How do we identify ways forward to kind of more formalize it and put it in as a kind of a roadmap to deliver it, so we can all find the common areas where we all contribute, and it's not just the traditional partnership of money and delivering services. Far beyond that one. Thank you.
Thank you. With that note, I think I'd like to switch gears and move it to our activity. I'm going to pass the microphone to Tracy, who's going to introduce the steps, and the rest of the panel, we can step off stage.
So it's an activity. I'm going to talk to you for a maximum of 5 minutes, and then this is all going to be about utilising the wonderful experience that we have in the room to actually dip down into some detail about how do we achieve some of what we're trying to achieve. So I'm going to give you a very quick overview, a first look at a business resilience tool that the GDPC is developing. Never mind the very boring first page. Okay, so I want you to imagine that you are a small or a medium business owner. You go to an app on your tablet, your phone, your computer. This would be one of the first things that you see. Not a page full of jargon, not a page full of information, but something to really try and make this real to you. There'll be a range of scenarios in this tool. This could be a storm, this could be a pandemic. Fire is one of the most common threats to almost all businesses. This is a way of trying to engage an SME, that this is relevant to them, and that yes, this could happen to me. After that, the idea for this tool is that we'll take the SME business owner or manager through a very quick series of questions This first one is the business continuity planning. They're supposed to sit there and go, am I confident that in this fire I could get my business back up and running? Possibly not. Am I confident that there'll be good leadership? Now that might be me leading, or it could be from within the rest of my organisation to get through this kind of disaster. Maybe, not sure. Can I call on others to help? Possibly something that they might not have thought of. Do I have what we call 3 a.m. friends that I can pick up the phone to at 3 a.m. and say, hey, have you got a generator that I could borrow to help my business get up and running? Do my staff understand what would need to be done to get through? This is very important because you do not recover a business after a major disaster as a one person alone effort. It requires the efforts of many people. I saw on the BBC news yesterday a picture of a supermarket in Japan that had moved all of its stock outside and was operating an outside supermarket. The building was too damaged to use, the stock was usable, they were selling essential goods that people needed. It wasn't the manager of that organisation, there was probably 10 or 15 staff needed to make that effort. So this area of content within the tool tries to get businesses to think about the fact that it takes more than one person alone to restore any one business. Final question that this medium business owner would see when they first enter this tool would be the idea of whether their staff are going to individually cope. Who's vulnerable? Who's got small children? Who has got partners that work for fire or police or emergency services? Start actually thinking about how are my staff going to cope and how can I help? So that's a very, very brief look at the beginning of this tool. It's to add some context to you, because now the wonderful team from the GDPC are going to hand out some of the actual material from within the tool, the actual activity or task that we're suggesting a medium business owner do to start working on their resilience. And what we want you to do is give your feedback on that. We're particularly interested in culture, whether some of the organisational resilience concepts that we use do translate, but genuinely interested in any and all feedback on the possible content. So remembering that we're dipping down into the actual, this whole 2 days is about how do we build resilience, and what you're going to have in front of you is actual activities. You're only going to see a few of them, obviously, there's a large number of them. Actual activities that a businesses can do to build their resilience. So we want this to be a team effort. So if you're sitting at the moment at a table that's only got 1 or 2, maybe even 3 people, could you please move? Just for the next half hour, because we'd like this to be a team effort. We would like you to have a look at the poster that you're going to be given, and we'd like you to discuss it as a group. I'd like you to use your pens and pencils, and I'd like you to scribble. Actually, preferably write so I can read it afterwards. Any feedback that you have directly on these posters. There are some specific questions for you at the bottom. And after about 5 minutes, I'm going to ask you to swap posters so that you are going to see a variety of material. After 5 minutes, maybe 10, we'll see how it goes. I'll ask you to please swap posters to the next table and start again. Read the material, read the exercise, think to yourself, will this work? Will this work in my company? Or how could it be made better so that it would work in my company? Will it work in my culture? And then at the end, I'm going to get all those posters back from you. I'm going to use your feedback. We're going to look at that feedback and see what we can do to make things better. So with that, if the GDPC could kindly hand out the posters. Is there any questions about what we need to do? Questions? Okay. If you're still at a wee table that's only got 1 or 2 people, it'd be great if you could find a bigger team. Go and network, build some relationships, start creating some 3 a.m. friends. Also, for the Thai participants, if need be, you're welcome to write in Thai, and I'll be able to get a translator to translate that. English is great, but if it's easier in Thai, please feel free and I'll get your comments translated afterwards. Okay. I'll let you know when it's time to swap posters.